Hey everyone, this is TCAP RECAP, but tonight we are not going to be recapping the TCAP. I just reached 1,000 subscribers yesterday, and I am fucking blown away that it happened, and that it happened so fast. It's amazing that people like my content this much, that they'll subscribe and watch it, is probably the best feeling I've ever experienced. Possibly outside of using hard drugs like heroin. But even that, it felt good in the moment, but I didn't do anything to achieve it or to earn it. I feel like this is more of an earned pleasure. So thank you so much for subscribing and liking and watching my videos. I'm still working on JPW's interview, but in celebration of 1,000 subscribers, I wanted to tell everyone an anecdote about myself that will let you know me a little bit deeper, connect a little bit more. After my last video, JPW's Chatlog, a lot of people expressed interest in how I would buy heroin off Reddit. So I wanted to explain how that went down and the first time I did it, which was also the first time that I ever bought heroin. Now, I do not condone or endorse drug use, except maybe cannabis, but definitely not opiates. I was lucky enough to use heroin before fentanyl hit. It's a funny thing to say, but I am truly thankful that I used opiates before this fentanyl epidemic, because if you were to randomly snort some quote unquote heroin that you have no idea if it's going to be just a bunch of fentanyl that'll kill you right away. It's so fucking dangerous to be an opiate user in 2022 that there's just no way. I mean, it's so fucking dangerous. So please don't do it. This story is for educational purposes only, to get a glimpse into the mindset of somebody who chooses to use heroin, which is what I did. Like, I didn't start with painkillers and work my way up. I just jumped right in and started using heroin. But anyway, I'm going to play some TCAP videos in the background and just keep them on mute. Shout out to Walls for both videos. Thank you, Walls, as always. I should also mention that the subreddit that I used was actually shut down in 2017, and corporate Reddit would never let that shit fly nowadays. So I don't feel there's that much risk in anybody copying me. But in case you feel like copying me and using an extremely dangerous drug, just fucking don't. I can keep on telling horror stories about this for days, for weeks, for months. I'm sure all other addicts can also tell you how fucking terrible it is. I knew how terrible it was, and I decided to do it anyway, as I'll explain. But don't do it, please. Please don't do it. And trigger warning for any people who are addicts. I do talk about drug use, so just be warned, and please don't put yourself in a situation where you're gonna set off cravings or anything. All right, with that said, let's get to it. So this all happened in fall of 2013, and back then Reddit was like the Wild West. There were general rules, but everywhere was a little bit different, and some places were more extreme than others. I first heard about the opiate subreddit through an Ask Reddit thread, actually. The question was something along the lines of, what's the darkest subreddit? And one of the answers was the opiate subreddit, that they were the most desperate, sad motherfuckers on the platform, something like that. And I went to check it out. I still found that stuff interesting at the time, and it was glamorizing it, even though I was a year sober and a year out of treatment. But as fall progressed, I got a dexedrine prescription, number one. It's like Adderall, but it's just pure dextroamphetamine, which is a central nervous stimulant. Levoamphetamine is a peripheral nervous stimulant. Adderall has levoamphetamine in it, and it produces the unpleasant side effects if people try to take too much. I was on a pretty high dose, and since I wasn't really abusing it for the most part, I considered myself, still sober, even though I was taking this high powered stimulant. But it got hard to sleep, and I wasn't going to drink alcohol ever again. That was my plan. But how else could I get myself to fall asleep faster? And benzodiazepines like Xanax and Klonopin are number one, they're very dangerous to mix together, and it does not take as much to kill you as you would think. Like, you don't have to mix heroic amounts of benzos and opiates together to die. It can happen with a much lower amount than you think. So just don't mix them. And number two, benzos act on the same receptors in your brain as alcohol, your GABA receptors, which meant I couldn't take them because once I start taking them, I forget I take them, so I take more, and then I forget I took more, so I take more. It's a nasty cycle. But I had never really tried opiates, so I thought, what the hell? Why not? I had used all the other big drugs except for methamphetamine, opiates, and crack, and in treatment, you would hear people tell these insane stories about what they would do for a hit and how, like, it was just so good that it didn't matter how shit your life was. A little bit of it or a lot of bit of it would make everything okay. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it just this once. I know what I'm doing because I've been to treatments. I figured it out. I cracked the code. I had a huge, huge ego and just unimaginable arrogance when it came to this. I had a friend at the time who I'll call Chad for anonymity's sake, and he had a problem with benzos, with a certain benzodiazepine that was available on the gray market. Like, you could legally buy it if you knew where to find it. And he had been hooked on the stuff way heavier than I knew at first. But we both had experience with addiction, and we would have, these long stone talks about it because I was doing dabs actually. And I would tell him, like, dude, I got this. Like, getting addicted to heroin, that's for chumps. I'm just gonna dabble and maybe use it to help myself go to sleep every once in a while because I'm Mr. Big Galaxy Brain over here. It's so funny because that's the same exact way that every other fucking person gets hooked. And there's a reason for that because it's one of the only drugs where theoretically, if you take just enough the first time to feel really good, you'll wake up the next day, you won't have a hangover, and it'll seem like a miracle drug because how can you feel that good without feeling bad the next day? Even psychedelics can have a hangover effect, but this one, it's so much better. So then you take it again, and it's not a big deal. You don't get hooked right away. You're not physically addicted right away. It's just like this awesome pick-me-up that you can do whenever you want because you don't feel sick afterwards. So anyway, that's how you get people thinking, I can beat this. I'm not going to end up like everybody else. And then they just end up like everybody else. But I was actually worse than everybody else because a lot of people go into it not realizing how dangerous or how bad it can get. But I already knew that because I had already been to treatment for drinking too much. And I still had the audacity to be arrogant about it going into it. Looking back, I realized that I was already in a spiral of addiction. Taking the Dexedrine, smoking dabs, I was already on my way down. I was in an elevator to hell going down, thinking I was going up. And God bless Chad, he tried to break through, but I was too confident. This arrogance and egoistic illusion that I was in iron control of myself would only be reinforced later on when I actually tried it for the first time. So we're getting back to Reddit now. There was a subreddit called Opiate Roll Call, and it had every single post was one of the 50 states. And you would find your state, open it up, comment if you were looking for a friend or if you were a friend looking to befriend people, and then you would meet up with them. And back then in 2013, it was super obvious exactly what it was. People would write reviews underneath friends saying, oh, they were such a great friend. We had a date and it was so cheap. So you could get an idea of who was better than the rest, and I picked the guy with the most reviews that were positive. Oh, it's surreal thinking back now, but it it gets worse. We started messaging back and forth. I was a new account. Hadn't even had my account for like a month at this point, and this guy was pretty brisk about business. I found out later that it was because he was abusing benzodiazepines and was barred out on Xanax most of the time. But he was real relaxed about it and gave me his phone number. So then we started texting. I felt awkward and did not know what I was doing because how do you prepare for having a text conversation with a stranger that's going to sell you hard drugs? I was never taught the etiquette, so I kind of had to feel it out. So I went with the etiquette of Craigslist, treating him like I was buying a car from him off Craigslist, saying things like, I'll pay extra if you just give me the stuff that you get. Just like with buying a car, there's that suspicion like maybe they're trying to sell me a lemon. And that's definitely the approach I had. Maybe this guy's trying to sell me fucking drywall, which would happen at a later date. Not from this guy, but from somebody else from the opiate roll call. But like I said, he was real chill about it, real cool, pretty professional. So eventually he asked me to call him. He's thinking about me maybe being a cop, but he's also kind of barred out, so he's not thinking that clearly. So I just talked in the lingo that I'd learned from the opiates subreddit, and he basically accepted me. Whatever test or logic he was using, I seemed to have passed, and we made plans to meet up later that night. It was Friday night, right before Halloween. At the time, I lived in a big college city, like basically right off campus in this big old townhouse situation in which we were on the top floor. And down the street was one of the main boulevards for the college. And it was always popping off, especially on the weekends, because there was bars, restaurants. All the cool kids hung out on this street because it wasn't frat row. And we made plans to meet at one of the corners where there was a bench that nobody really sat on at night because everybody was moving. So I go down there and sit on the bench and look down at the guy at the other end who looks like a normal dude. He looks, about 10 years older than everybody who's walking around. And he looks at me and then kind of like nods, and I nod and smile. And then he scoots over and says, "You so and so," giving me the Reddit name that I had chosen. And I'm excited. I'm like, "Yeah, yep, I am. How's it going? What's up?" And he hands me a rolled up newspaper, one of the free ones that you could get around just anywhere, and says, "You should really check out the news on page 9." And I grab it, understanding what's going on, and hand him the money, which he looks a little shocked and just like grabs it real quick and is like, "Dude, come on, come on." And I am preparing to stand back up, just trusting that it's in there, trying to make a show of like trusting him to indicate that he will trust me if I trust him. And he honestly seemed like a legit guy at the time. And we'll touch upon this later, but he was legit at the time because he had a thriving business selling drugs on opiate roll call. And he gives me this serious look and says, "No, check out the news on page 9." And I'm still not understanding really because I'm stoned and had been taking, Dexedrine all day. And I'm just like, "Yeah, man, page 9, I get it. Okay, sounds good." And he's like, "No, page 9, that's where it is. I want you to see it." Because he wanted me to know that he wasn't screwing me over. He would screw me over eventually, like months down the road when things turned south for him. But there it was. I had bought just a little tiny bit because I wanted to make sure it was legit. And it was a little grayish white rock, like a little tiny pebble looking thing. So I thank him, get up. We go our literal separate ways. Him down towards the bar he was at, me towards my house, which is within walking distance. I get back to my house, and this is where I'm going to touch upon why I got so cocky and arrogant because I did the dope and got really, really sick. I was so nauseous, vomiting constantly, and like trying not to pass out because turns out this was really good stuff. And the cartels, there were news stories on this later on, that the cartels were flooding cities across the border, trying to create more addicts, and then they would pull the rug out and cut the dope. And so they would make a bunch of money then because they would already have people coming to them looking for the good stuff, paying the same price, but getting like half the value that they were before. And man, that sucked. So I thought, look, I have a terrible reaction to it. I didn't enjoy that at all. I can take this stuff without risk. I'll never like it. And I actually went back to buy more from the guy that night. We, again, texted back and forth. I praised the drugs, trying to act like this wasn't my first time. And this time he invites me to go to the bar and meet up with him. And I don't remember if he said girlfriend, but it was like implied romantic partner. So I go walk back down again, go into the bar, which is this really cool, chill place with like couches and shit. And he flags me down this time because he's done more drugs and has been drinking. Flags me down. I go and sit over with them. The woman who is possibly his girlfriend is like 15 years older than him, but nice enough. She's also high. And so I actually sit down with him and chill for a little bit. And we kind of just have dumb chit chat. Again, I'm being over the top nice to make sure that he doesn't screw me over. I would find out the hard way that it doesn't matter how nice you are to somebody in the opiate game. They will turn on you in a moment if they need to. And that's not an indictment of opiate addicts. It's just withdrawal after a certain point gets to be unbearable. And you'd rather live with the consequences of doing somebody dirty than be sick for a moment longer. I will make a confession that I never really used enough days in a row to go through like full withdrawal that way. I would often binge for, a weekend here and there, and I actually stopped before progressing into daily use. I just couldn't afford it. But I did take naltrexone once after using a bunch of dope to try to make sure that I could pass a drug test to stay in my sober home. And the naltrexone kicked me into instant withdrawal. Ugh, man, I was sick as a fucking dog for like 6 hours. Just instant full-blown withdrawal. I hadn't ever really experienced it before. I'd gotten sick, like feeling like shit, feeling guilty, bad, sniffles, a little nauseous, that kind of thing, but never something this bad. But I passed my drug test, so it all worked out in the end, and actually, that was the last time that I used. After that, I started Suboxone. Saved my life. But back to the bar with my dope dealer and his possibly girlfriend. We all get up to leave at the same time, and as we're walking out, cars can park on both sides of the street. But as we walk out, somebody across the street trying to pull out of the parking spot that they had to parallel park to get into hits the car in front of them, and my newfound dope dealer, he immediately jumps into action like some sort of superhero and goes, hey, hey, and runs over. And the person who was driving the car was like an older guy with his older wife. And my dope dealer, hero that he is, stood there and like pointed at the car he hit, pointed at him, waited until he got out of the car and was just like, sir, I'm just making sure that everything goes down like it's supposed to, and played off like being this good Samaritan. And he actually stood there until the guy wrote out his info and put it on the car in front of him, stuck it in the windshield wipers on the rear. And after that, my new dealer let the man leave with his wife and returned to us because I was standing there next to his possibly girlfriend, who's 25 years older than me. And we're just having some good conversation, same kind of drug chatter that we were having inside, both talking about how excellent our lives were going, that kind of shit. That's a very common kind of conversation I've found between addicts, especially when we're using, talking about how, oh yeah, we're about to get clean and start doing this crazy adventure. I'm getting clean next week and I'm moving out of state to go to college again. And then, 2 weeks passed and you talk to the same person and they're saying, yeah, I'm getting clean next week and going back to college. I did it myself. I was always just using this one last time. That was my big thing. This was always the last time. And then I was going to put my nose to the grindstone and get on with my life. But my dealer walks back over. We all say, great job, man. Good job. And start walking. They offer to give me a ride to my house, which in my foolishness I take and get into her old beat up minivan, and I direct them to my house, which is just like a couple blocks away. And I regretted that later because I was like, oh shit, they know where I live, which nothing ever came of it because he was a nice guy. He was just an addict in very deep addiction. But that's what I thought the next day. Anyway, so I continued to use like that very sporadically for a couple months, and every time I would use it, it was what's called East Coast powder, and you'd crush it up and snort it, or you could inject it, which I was not doing. It always made me sick, like real sick, and I would spend all day throwing up if I kept snorting it, but it was a sedative, so it worked for that reason. But there were gaps of like months at a time between my first couple of uses, and that all convinced me like, hey, I don't need to worry, I can't get addicted. Just reinforced that egotistical, galaxy brain, arrogant attitude I had. And it wasn't until, and I realize I'm going to kind of geolocate myself here a little bit. It wasn't until I got to try black tar heroin that I was able to take just enough to feel perfect, and that was the beginning of the end, everybody. But anyway, that is my story of the first time I bought hard drugs off Reddit. Hope you enjoyed. Please let me know in the comments if you like this kind of content, if you want to hear more, if you want to hear less, if I was too trite, if it was helpful. Feel free to really rip into me if you want to. But I hope whatever you're doing, you're having a great time, and I will catch you on the flip side.